Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, before gladiators spilled blood under the Colosseum sun, before emperors sat cloaked in purple silk and paranoia, before Rome ruled the world. It was a struggling little town of huts, myths and sharp bronze blades. Dim the lights, pour yourself something era appropriate, a glass of watered wine if you're feeling authentic, and let's wander into the mists of early Roman history. Because what we now call Rome didn't start with marble. It began with mud, murder, and a wolf. Legend says Rome was founded in 753 BCE. But let's be honest, legends in Rome tend to blur the line between myth and PR campaign. Our story begins not with Romulus and Remus, but with a man named Numitor, a king of Alba Longa. He ruled peacefully until his brother Amulius, a man with ambition but no charm, overthrew him faster than a Senate vote under Caesar. Amulius didn't just seize the throne, he erased threats. He exiled Numitor, murdered his sons, and forced his niece Rhea Silvia into becoming a Vestal virgin. That role came with strict vows of chastity and a temple salary. No kids, no heirs. Neatly done, right? Well, the gods had other ideas. One moonless night, Rhea Silvia claimed she was visited by Mars himself, yes, the god of war, and later gave birth to twin boys, Romulus and Remus. Now, whether that was divine intervention or just an extremely bold excuse, we'll never know. But the twins were born, and Amulius, upon hearing the news, didn't exactly send a gift basket. He ordered the infants thrown into the Tiber River. They were placed in a basket and cast downstream, which, to be clear, was not a common Roman christening tradition. But here's where the legend starts layering on the drama. The basket drifted until it snagged on the roots of a fig tree at the base of Palatine Hill. There, a she-wolf, Lupa, found the crying babes, suckled them, and kept them alive. Yes, a literal wolf. Or perhaps, as some ancient historians hinted, a human woman nicknamed the Wolf for her loose morals. You decide. But either way, the twins lived. And here's where history and myth start making out in public. Raised by a shepherd named Faustulus, the boys grew up hardy, fast with fists, faster with insults, and seemingly destined to shake the world. Next time, Romulus and Remus grow up, find out who they really are. And spoiler, sibling rivalry turns into something a bit more. Romulus and Remus grew not as pampered sons of royalty, but as tough, calloused boys in the back hills of Latium. Faustulus, their adoptive father, was a humble shepherd who taught them to track wolves, split kindling, and speak with a certain suspicious clarity when questioned by armed strangers. You know, basic Roman boyhood survival. By their teens, the twins were already known across the Sabine pastures, not for manners, but for picking fights with cattle thieves and winning them. They led bands of fellow shepherds in skirmishes, so frequent they were either forming a militia or a very angry theatre troupe. But while they played war in the woods, something darker brewed beneath. Remus was caught during a raid. Not just any raid, a robbery of King Amulius's royal livestock. Taken in chains, bruised but smirking, Remus was dragged before the king. Meanwhile, Faustulus, eyes wide and voice shaking, told Romulus the truth. The wolf was only half the story. They were not shepherds by birth, but sons of Rhea Silvia, princess and Vestal virgin, and grandchildren of the true king, Numitor. Romulus didn't speak. He just stood, the firelight flickering against his clenched jaw. Then he left, bow slung across his shoulder, fury burning cold in his chest. He was going to Alba Longa. Alba Longa stood like a relic, grey-stoned, ivy-wrapped, and under the thumb of a tyrant. Amulius ruled not with ceremony, but with spies, executioners, and the ever-present dread of secrets coming to light. Romulus arrived in disguise. Not difficult, really. Shepherds were rarely stopped at the gates, unless they smelled of ambition. While Remus languished in the palace dungeon, Romulus crept through the alleys, searching for one man, Numitor. The old king lived under guard in a half-crumbling estate, beard like mistletoe, eyes sharp with old pain. When Romulus revealed the scar on his arm, the one Rhea Silvia had marked at birth, Numitor dropped to his knees. The rightful king had grandsons. The wolf sons had returned. Within hours, the plan took shape. Romulus roused the shepherds. Romulus escaped, having snapped a guard's neck with a chain. And by nightfall, they stormed the palace like a thunderclap. Amulius awoke to fire, shouting, and the sight of Romulus with a torch in one hand and a stolen sword in the other. The tyrant fled to the throne room, but found Romulus waiting. Their final exchange was short. Steel met flesh, and Amulius fell before the sun rose. Numitor was restored. The people cheered. But for the twins, ruling Alba Longa wasn't enough. Romulus and Remus stood atop Palatine Hill, wind dragging at their cloaks. "This is the place," Romulus said. Remus frowned. "It's a hill." "It's the hill," Romulus replied. "The she-wolf saved us here. We build here." So began their dream to found a city, not just to live in, but to lead. They gathered outcasts, debtors, fighters, even runaway slaves. The kind of people who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The foundation of Rome wasn't marble. It was desperation and hope, mixed with ambition and dust. But not everything was celebratory. The twins disagreed on everything. City layout, temples, the wall height. Who got which hill? And then came the question of naming it. "I saved you," Remus reminded him. "I was the one thrown in chains. And I killed Amulius," Romulus said. "This was my idea." So they agreed, kind of, to ask the gods. They each stood on separate hills. Romulus on Palatine, Remus on Aventine. They watched the sky for signs. 6 vultures appeared above Remus. Moments later, 12 above Romulus. Remus claimed he saw his birds first. Romulus claimed he saw more. And that's when the laughter stopped. They argued for days. The followers split into camps. Some said Remus was the rightful founder, having received the first omen. Others swore Romulus had divine approval. With his double dozen vultures, tension crackled like dry branches. The city, if you could call it that, was becoming two. Romulus began building walls on Palatine. Nothing impressive yet, but symbolic. Stones laid, trenches dug, a border. Remus, in protest, leapt over the half-built wall. "This is your mighty Rome?" he mocked. "Even I can jump over it." Romulus said nothing. Then he picked up a spade. A shout, a thud, silence. Remus lay in the dust, blood pooling beneath him. It's unclear if Romulus struck him, or if one of his men did, but Romulus claimed the act. "Let all who leap my walls meet the same fate," he said. He buried his brother with full rites, then turned to the others and said, "Now we build." Romulus named the city Roma. He crowned himself king, not with laurel, but with the loyalty of the desperate. He needed people, and not just builders, but citizens. So he opened asylum on the Capitoline Hill. Thieves, exiles, vagabonds, all were welcome. Rome's earliest population wasn't noble, it was hungry. Temples rose, crude but proud. Laws were declared. Streets took shape. But there was one problem: women. Rome had none. Neighboring tribes mocked the city of bachelors. Romulus sent envoys to form alliances, but was met with laughter. So he turned to a more Roman solution, strategy mixed with audacity. He invited the Sabines to a festival, a grand celebration with food, games, and feasting. The Sabines arrived in droves, bringing their daughters. It was all very friendly until Romulus gave the signal. The Roman men seized the Sabine women. Swords were drawn. Chaos erupted. Fathers fled. Daughters screamed. Romulus stood amidst the mayhem and shouted, "You came as guests. Now stay as mothers of Rome." Rome had women now, but also enemies. The Sabines were furious. They called it treachery, kidnapping, war, and they weren't wrong. But Romulus had calculated the risk. He treated the Sabine women not as hostages, but as citizens, gave them homes, rights, respect. Some began to soften, others didn't. But the Sabine king, Titus Titius, was not here to negotiate. He gathered allies and marched on Rome. The battle that followed was brutal. Sabines took the Tarpeian Rock, helped, tragically, by Tarpeia, a Roman maiden who betrayed the city in exchange for what she thought were golden bracelets. The Sabines granted her wish and crushed her beneath their golden shields. Then came the standoff in the Forum. Swords drawn, brothers against former friends. But before the bloodbath began, the Sabine women, the stolen wives, the new Romans, ran into the field between the armies, hair wild, eyes blazing. "Enough," they cried. "We are your daughters and your wives. If you fight, it is us who will be widowed or orphaned." Silence fell. Romulus stepped forward. Titus Tatius did too. And for the first time in Roman history, two kings ruled the same city, jointly, uneasily, and under constant watch. The co-rule didn't last long. Rome, under Romulus and Titus. Titius was like a cart pulled by two oxen who hated each other. Titius distrusted the Senate. Romulus distrusted Titius's men. Every feast was a potential assassination attempt, with nicer table settings. It ended, predictably, in blood. When Tatius protected his Sabine soldiers after they murdered Roman envoys in Lavinium, the trust snapped. During a visit to the same city, Titus was ambushed and killed. Romulus mourned him publicly, but privately, he breathed easier. He was now the sole king of Rome. Under his reign, the city flourished. Temples to Jupiter, Juno, and Mars rose. Fortifications thickened. Trade expanded. He organized the people into tribes. Rhamnes, Tites, Luceres. Early echoes of the bureaucracy Rome would one day perfect. And yet, Romulus grew colder. He no longer consulted the Senate. He acted on whims. Rumors spread. He was becoming a tyrant. But then, something stranger happened. In the 38th year of his reign, Romulus disappeared. The king had been inspecting troops on the field of Mars when a sudden storm erupted. Lightning cracked, wind howled, darkness swallowed the gathering. And when the air cleared, Romulus was gone. Some whispered the senators killed him and covered it with thunder. Others believed the gods had taken him. A man named Proculus Julius later claimed Romulus appeared to him in a vision, rising to the heavens, declaring, "Go tell the Romans, it is the will of the gods that my Rome be the capital of the world. So shall it be." He was deified as Quinos, god of war and statecraft. Rome had lost its founder, but gained a myth, and now it needed a new king. No one wanted to be the king after Romulus. The Senate feared rebellion if they chose wrong. For a time, Rome had no king. Just 10 senators rotating power in 10-day cycles. It worked terribly. Arguments, gridlock, grain shortages. The people begged for a single voice. Eventually they agreed. The next king would be a Sabine, to preserve the old alliance. And one name echoed from hill to hill. Numa Pompilius. He didn't want the job. A quiet man from Cures, Numa was more philosopher than warrior. A student of law, divination, and peace, he worshipped not with blood, but with offerings. But after omens, dreams, and a delegation of senators, quite literally camping on his lawn, he relented. Numa entered Rome in silence, and thus began a reign that would shape the very soul of the Republic. Numa Pompilius ruled not with a sword, but with ritual. Where Romulus had conquered, Numa codified. He built Rome's first temples to Janus, god of beginnings and endings, Vesta, goddess of the hearth, and Fides, spirit of trust. He established the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, and gave Rome its first religious calendar, dividing the year into months, days, and holy rites. He outlawed blood sacrifice, closed the gates of the Temple of Janus, a sign Rome was at peace, and introduced the Vestal Virgins as sacred protectors of the hearth. People whispered he spoke with Egeria, a divine nymph from the woods who advised him on spiritual lore. Whether she was real, myth, or metaphor, Numa listened. Rome changed, grew more disciplined, less impulsive, and yet not all approved. Some warriors chafed at the peace, Others muttered that, without expansion, Rome would rot. Numa reigned for 43 years. When he died, they say he left behind a city of laws, but not armies. Rome had known its wolf. Now it had known its sage. If Numa Pompilius was the priest-king, Tullus Hostilius was the sword. After Numa's death, the Romans wanted strength, expansion, glory. Tullus delivered it in spades and iron. A descendant of Romulus's warriors, Tullus was everything Numa wasn't. Loud, ambitious, and entirely unbothered by divine warnings. In fact, he mocked the old religious rituals, calling them Sabine softness. His first move, war. Rome declared battle on Alba Longa, its ancestral cousin, a brutal symbolic move, like challenging your older brother to a duel and bringing an axe. But instead of open warfare, both sides proposed a strange solution, trial by champions. 3 brothers from Rome, the Horatii, 3 from Alba, the Curiatii. The duel was savage. 2 Horatii fell. All 3 Curiatii were wounded. The last Roman brother, Publius Horatius, feigned retreat, then struck them down one by one. Rome won. But the aftermath was worse. When Horatius returned to Rome, his head held high, people cheered, all except one. His sister, Horaia, screamed at him in the forum. One of the Curiae had been her fiancé. "You killed him," she cried. "You butchered the man I loved." Horatius, in front of the entire city, turned and stabbed her. "She mourns a foreign enemy," he spat. "Let traitors beware." The crowd gasped. The Senate was torn. But instead of execution, they devised a trial. The people voted for mercy, citing his service to Rome. So Horatius walked free. But a shadow fell over Tullus's Rome. Alba Longa, though technically loyal, plotted behind the scenes. When their king Metius Fufatius betrayed Rome during a skirmish, Tullus had him tied between 2 chariots and ripped apart. Literally, it was vengeance, it was theatre, and it was Roman. Flush with victory, Tullus built Rome's first curia, the Senate House. He expanded the cavalry. He trained armies year-round, but he mocked the gods. When plague struck the city, the people begged Tullus to restore Numa's rituals. At first he refused. Then he tried, clumsily. He performed the sacred rites to Jupiter. Incorrectly, lightning struck his house. When the flames cleared, there was no body, just ashes. Rome took the hint. The next king? Someone who wouldn't joke about omens. Enter Ancus Marcius, grandson of Numa, but with a sword tucked beneath his toga. Ancus brought balance. He restored temples, revived ceremonies, but didn't shy from battle when provoked. He built Rome's first prison, the Mamertine, under the Capitoline Hill, and more importantly, established Ostia, the port at the mouth of the Tiber, giving Rome access to salt, trade, and naval muscle. Ancus also extended Rome's reach across the river, linking hills with wooden bridges and fortified watchtowers. But the world was changing. The Latin tribes were growing restless. Etruscan merchants eyed Rome with greed. And far to the north, in Tarquin, a man named Lucumo was preparing to change Rome forever. Lucumo was wealthy, educated, half Greek and Etruscan. His wife Tanaquil was noble-born, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and unafraid to speak before men. But in Etruria, foreigners were always foreigners. Lucumo had ambition, but no future in Tarquin. So they packed their belongings, loaded a chariot, and rode south to Rome, a city of dust, legends, and opportunity. As they neared the gates, an eagle swooped down, snatched Lucumo's cap, then returned it gently. Tanaquil smiled. "The gods favor you," she said. "You will wear a crown." In Rome, Lucumo took the name Lucius Tarquinius Priscus and began climbing. He befriended senators, sponsored games, donated to temples, and when King Ancus died, he campaigned for the crown, not by blood, by merit. And Rome, for the first time, crowned a foreigner, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus. Rome's fifth king, ruled like a man determined to make history forget he was ever a foreigner. He doubled the size of the Senate, launched new public works, and brought Etruscan flair to Roman architecture. Streets were paved, drains were dug. The first Circus Maximus was built, a vast chariot racing stadium, where Roman citizens could cheer, gamble, and occasionally riot in style. But Tarquinius wanted more than civic glory. He wanted security. He waged wars against the Sabines, Latins, and Etruscans, expanding Roman territory and filling the treasury. Captured kings were paraded through the Forum in chains. Rome was no longer a scrappy city-state. It was the rising fist of Latium. Yet not all were pleased. The sons of Ancus Marcius passed over for the throne, seethed in silence. They watched as this foreigner built his legacy atop their fathers, and they began to plot. The assassination was quick and quiet. Two shepherds, armed with cleavers, approached Tarquinius as he presided over a case in the Forum. They claimed a dispute over stolen sheep. As he listened, one raised his arm as if to gesture, and brought the blade down on the king's skull. Panic erupted. The shepherds were cut down by guards, but Tarquinius lay bleeding. Tanaquil, ever the tactician, acted fast. She closed the palace gates, announced the king was merely wounded, and summoned Servius Tullius, her son-in-law and trusted advisor. Then she did something extraordinary. She faked the king's survival. From behind a curtained window, a man mimicked Tarquinius's voice, issuing commands and naming Servius regent. Days later, the real Tarquinius died, but the trick worked. Servius Tullius, born a slave, now ruled Rome. Servius Tullius was a mystery. Some said he was the son of a captured noblewoman. Others whispered he was the child of a household slave, raised by Tanaquil out of pity or prophecy. One tale claimed his head once caught fire while he slept, but the flames didn't harm him. Tanaquil took that as a sign. Now king, Servius proved he was no mere placeholder. He instituted Rome's first census, categorizing citizens by wealth, property, and military eligibility. The city's first class system was born, rich at the top, poor at the bottom, but all given a place. He divided the land into tribes, restructured the army, and built the Servian Wall, fortifying Rome like never before. And most radically, he proposed giving the common people, the plebeians, more say in governance. The nobles were unimpressed, especially the Tarquins, descendants of the dead king, now sidelined by a man born in bondage. One Tarquin in particular, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, was sharpening his knives. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, grandson of Tarquinius Priscus, had inherited not just ambition, but a particular hatred for the slave king, who now wore what he considered his rightful crown. Superbius, meaning the proud, was charming when needed, vicious when not, and utterly without scruples. He married Tullia, Servius's daughter, but not the kind-hearted one. Tullia Minor matched her husband's cruelty blow for blow. Together, they formed what historians would later call a union of ambition and blood. Their plan was simple: isolate Servius, win over the Senate, and take the throne. And in the final act, Superbus stormed the Curia, hurled the aged Servius down the steps of the Senate House, and left him to die in the street. Tullia, ever eager to go one horror further, rode her chariot over her father's body. Rome gasped. The monarchy had just turned dark. Now King Tarquinius Superbus ruled not by law, but by fear. He executed senators without trial, dismantled numerous reforms, shut down public debate. If the people wanted bread, they worked. If they wanted mercy, they prayed. The great temples continued, including the massive temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, but they were built with slave labor and bloodied whips. Superbus didn't consult the Senate. He relied on spies, informants, and family loyalty, and even that was tested. But there was one man trusted above all, his son, Sextus Tarquinius. And Sextus, well, his actions would bring down the entire monarchy. Coming next, betrayal, brutality, and a woman named Lucretia, whose fate would ignite the Roman Republic. Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son, was everything his father had made him. Handsome, privileged, and monstrously entitled. He was raised in a palace of whispers and executions, where mercy was weakness and violence meant power. As Rome's prince, he wielded influence like a dagger, quick, precise, and often fatal. But his downfall began, ironically, during a moment of boredom. While Rome's army laid siege to the Latin town of Ardea, Sextus and other noble officers began arguing in camp, not about strategy, but about whose wife was the most virtuous. They decided to ride back to Rome, unannounced, to catch their wives in their natural state, a risky experiment in ego. What they found shaped history. Most of the wives were feasting or gossiping, but one, Lucretia, was sitting in her husband's house, spinning wool by lamplight. She greeted the men graciously. Her home was orderly, her eyes were honest. Her husband, Collatinus, beamed with pride. Sextus smiled too, but his smile wasn't admiration. It was hunger. Days later, Sextus returned to Lucretia's home alone. He came as a guest, was welcomed as kin, and in the dead of night he entered her chamber, sword drawn, eyes cold. He gave her a choice, submit or die. Worse still, he threatened to kill her and a slave, placing their bodies together in bed, so shame would cling to her even in death. Lucretia, noble and righteous, yielded not out of fear, but to protect her name from false scandal. In the morning, she summoned her husband and father, along with a trusted family friend, a Roman named Lucius Junius Brutus. Tears in her eyes, voice trembling, she told them everything. Then, without waiting for judgment, she plunged a dagger into her heart. She died on her knees, but rose as a symbol. Brutus caught her body in his arms, stood, and swore a public oath. By this blood, by this outrage, I swear, Tarquinius and all his house shall fall. Rome shall never again serve a king. The Republic had just been born, in grief and fury. Lucius Junius Brutus was once thought slow-witted. His name, Brutus, meant dull or stupid. He had played the fool in court, carefully, to survive among Tarquin's watchful eyes. But behind the act was a blade of intelligence honed by patience. Now the mask dropped. Brutus rallied the Roman people, holding Lucretia's bloody dagger aloft in the forum. He denounced the Tarquins, father, son, dynasty. He called for the end of kingship. The crowd roared. The Senate, stunned by Lucretia's death and emboldened by the rising anger, voted unanimously. Tarquinius Superbus was exiled. Brutus and Collatinus were named the first consuls of Rome. Elected magistrates, not monarchs, each would rule for 1 year. Power would be shared, limited, controlled. The monarchy was dead. But Tarquinius Superbus was not finished. Tarquinius fled to Cameri, an Etruscan city, with what remained of his loyalists, but he didn't weep or wither. He plotted. First he begged the Senate for restoration. They ignored him. Then he sought aid from nearby kings. His first ally was Lars Porsena, ruler of Closium, a man as proud as Tarquinius, and just as willing to shed blood for legacy. Porsena agreed to march on Rome, not for friendship, but for conquest. The siege that followed tested Rome's newborn republic. Food ran low, spirits faltered, but the people refused to surrender. And from the darkness, heroes emerged. As Porsena's forces neared the city, the only defense left was the wooden Sublician bridge across the Tiber. If they crossed it, Rome was lost. A Roman officer named Horatius Cochlus, one-eyed, battle-hardened and defiant, took his stand at the bridge's mouth. With 2 comrades at his side, he held back the Etruscan advance as Roman engineers chopped the bridge down behind him. Arrow after arrow struck. Spears clanged off his shield. But Horatius held. When the bridge finally collapsed, he turned, prayed to the river god, and leapt into the Tiber, armor and all. He swam back, wounded but alive. Rome was saved, and the message was clear. This was no longer the Rome of kings. It was a republic, and it would bleed for its freedom. Tarquinius Superbus wasn't done. His pride, his sons, his legacy, all had been cast out by a city of shepherds turned rebels, and he wanted it back, so he turned to subterfuge. While Porsenna continued his siege, Tarquin's loyalists within the city began plotting. Among them were discontented nobles, men who feared the new republic and longed for the comfort of a single ruler who rewarded loyalty with gold. But word leaked. A slave overheard hushed voices in the forum. Names, dates, weapons. He reported it. Brutus investigated. The news shattered him. Among the conspirators were his own sons, Titus and Tiberius. Brutus's blood had conspired to restore the king. The punishment? Death. Brutus didn't hesitate. He sat in silence as the executioner carried out the sentence. No tears, no protest. The crowd was silent too, watching their consul watch his sons die. In that moment, the Republic didn't just survive, it hardened. Still, Porsenna's siege wore on. Supplies dwindled, rumors swirled. Some said the Senate was ready to surrender. Others whispered of assassination. One young Roman, Gaius Mucius, took it upon himself to act. Disguised as a common soldier, he slipped into the Etruscan camp with a dagger tucked beneath his cloak. His mission, kill Porsenna. But fate is fickle. Mucius mistook the king's scribe for the monarch and stabbed the wrong man. Captured and dragged before Porsenna, he didn't beg for mercy. Instead, he thrust his right hand into a brazier, letting the flesh burn without a cry. "I am but one of 300 Roman youths," he lied, "each sworn to kill you." Porsenna, shaken by such reckless courage, released him. From then on, Mucius was called Scaevola, the left-handed, and Porsenna began to wonder, could such a people ever truly be conquered? Still, the siege pressed on. Porsenna demanded hostages in exchange for peace, noble children meant to keep Rome compliant. Among them was a young girl named Cloelia. She watched, listened, waited. Then one night, as the guards slept and the moon lit the Tiber, she led a daring escape, gathering the other hostages, stealing a horse, and swimming the river under a rain of Etruscan arrows. She made it back to Rome, soaked, shivering, but alive. Porsenna demanded her return. The Senate debated. Cloelia, calm and composed, volunteered to go back, but only if she could choose which hostages stayed with her. She chose the youngest boys, ensuring their safety. Porsenna, impressed by her bravery, not only spared her, he honored her. Rome erected a statue of her on horseback, not a goddess, not a queen, a girl who defied fear. Eventually, Porsenna tired of the war. Rome wouldn't fall, the people wouldn't break. He'd come for conquest and found stubbornness wrapped in stone and iron. He negotiated peace. Tarquinius Superbus, abandoned by his would-be savior, fled once more, this time to the Latin city of Tusculum, where his son-in-law ruled. But he wasn't finished yet. No armies remained. No allies answered his calls. But Tarquin had one weapon left: time. He would wait, fester, find one more chance. Meanwhile, Rome breathed easier. Its first major foreign war had ended, not in surrender, but in survival, and just in time, because a new threat was rising, not from Etruria, but from the south. The Latin League was watching, and they weren't impressed with this republic. The Latin League, a coalition of Rome's neighbors, gathered under one banner and one name, Tarquinius Superbus. The exiled king promised them glory, land, revenge, and if they helped him restore his crown, they would rule beside him. It was a final gamble, and the Latins took it. The two forces met near Lake Regillius, in the fields of Tusculum. Roman consuls led their armies, including Aulus Postumius, a general known for his strict discipline and colder sword. It was said the battle raged so fiercely that the gods themselves intervened. Two mysterious horsemen, tall, radiant, and armed like heroes of old, appeared on the Roman flanks, cutting through Latin lines like fire through dry wheat. Rome won. The Latin League was crushed. Tarquinius Superbus, last king of Rome, fled into obscurity, and the Republic, bloodied but unbroken, began to look not like an experiment, but like destiny. Rome had repelled kings, crushed foreign armies, and declared itself a republic. But with the wars behind them, a more dangerous enemy emerged: inequality. The patricians, wealthy, land-owning elites, controlled the Senate, courts, and priesthoods. The plebeians, commoners, tradesmen, soldiers, bore the burdens of war, paid the taxes, and reaped almost none of the benefits. They couldn't hold office. They had no right to intermarry with patricians. If they owed debt, they could be enslaved. The poor had bled for Rome. Now they were drowning in it. Protests erupted. When ignored, the plebeians did something Rome had never seen before. They left. Thousands marched out of the city to the sacred mount, refusing to work or fight until their grievances were addressed. The Senate panicked. No workers, no soldiers, no Rome. So they negotiated. Out of that standoff came the creation of the tribune of the plebs, officials elected by the people, with one sacred power, the veto. If a law harmed the people, the tribune could shout veto, I forbid it, and stop the Senate in its tracks. The Republic had blinked, but it was still standing. For now. But the victory was incomplete. Debt still shackled the plebeians. Farms lost to war had been claimed by patricians. Veterans returned home, only to find their land gone and their families enslaved. One soldier, a man named Lucius Sicinius, became the voice of the plebs. He stood in the forum and tore open his tunic, revealing scars not from farming, but from battle. He shouted, "This body defended Rome, and now it is chained by Rome." The crowd erupted. More protests followed. Some patricians offered reforms. Others sent in soldiers. The second secession of the plebs followed. Another mass walkout, another crisis. In response, the Senate made a promise: written law. Until now, Rome's laws had been oral, vague, changeable, enforced unevenly. The plebs demanded something permanent, something they could see. The Senate agreed. A commission of 10 men, the decemviri, was appointed to carve the law into stone, and carve they did. The 12 tables were Rome's first written code of law, etched into bronze and displayed in the forum for all to read. They were a mix of justice, custom, and cold practicality. They established legal procedure, property rights, inheritance, and penalties, including brutal ones: execution for theft at night, death for false witness, banishment for corrupt judges. But they also guaranteed some protections for plebeians: rights to appeal, limits on debt imprisonment, and perhaps most radically, public access to the law itself. It wasn't equality, but it was a start. Still, the decemviri did not give up power easily, especially one of them, Appius Claudius. He had tasted absolute authority and wasn't eager to give it up, so he found a reason to keep ruling, and the Republic teetered once again. Appius Claudius, drunk on power, set his sights on something monstrous. A young plebeian girl named Virginia, daughter of a Roman centurion, caught his eye. She was betrothed, well-born, and entirely out of reach. So he fabricated a charge that Virginia was born of a slave, and therefore property his to claim. She was seized in the street. Her father, Lucius Virginius, rushed back from the front lines to confront the claim. In court, Appius sat as judge and ruled in his own favor. Then, in a moment, burned into Roman memory, Virginius drew a knife from a butcher's stall and killed his own daughter, crying, "Only death can keep her free." The forum froze. Then it erupted. Outrage swept through the city. The decemviri, once respected, were now reviled. Protesters flooded the streets. Soldiers defected. The Senate, sensing the tide, turned on Appius Claudius. He fled, arrested, and in one final grasp for dignity, took his own life in prison. The decemviri were dissolved. The tribunes were restored, consuls reinstated. The 12 tables remained, carved in bronze, now soaked in symbolism. Rome had stared into tyranny once more and pulled back, but the lesson lingered. Even in a republic, power could rot, and soon that power would be tested again. Not by patricians, but by a new rising force, Rome's ambition to rule all of Italy. Rome had survived kings, civil unrest, and class warfare. Now, it set its gaze beyond the city walls. The Italian peninsula was a patchwork of tribes and towns. The Volsci, Aequi, Samnites, Etruscans, Latins, each with their own gods, grudges, and grudging respect for Rome's recent victories. The Latin cities were first. Though bound to Rome by old treaties and recent wars, they bristled at being treated like junior partners in their own league. They wanted equality. Rome offered superiority. The Latin War erupted in 340 BCE. Rome faced not an enemy, but an entire alliance of once allies. And for the first time, Rome learned the value of its citizen soldier. Men who fought not for a king, but for themselves, for their city, for a republic that, in theory, could be theirs. And at the head of these men, a consul who would make the ultimate sacrifice. At the Battle of Vesuvius, the Romans faced a coalition nearly equal in number and superior in position. One consul, Publius Decius Mus, made a chilling vow, an ancient ritual known as the devotio. In full armor, he prayed to the gods of the underworld, dedicated his own life for the victory of Rome, and then charged alone into enemy lines. He was cut down, but the Latins faltered. Rome seized the moment. The soldiers roared. The tide turned. The battle was won. Rome's message was clear. They would die to win. After the war, Rome dismantled the Latin League. Some cities were absorbed. Others were given partial citizenship. Most importantly, no Latin city was allowed to ally with another without Rome's approval. Divide and rule. It was becoming a Roman specialty. But further south, a deadlier enemy awaited. The Samnites were mountain warriors, fierce, proud, and unafraid of Rome's growing shadow. The First Samnite War, 343 BCE, began over the city of Capua, where Rome intervened to protect allies from Samnite aggression. Rome won early, but peace was temporary. The Second Samnite War, 326 BCE, was a full-scale disaster in its opening years. Rome marched into the mountain passes of Caudine Forks and walked straight into a trap. Surrounded, outmaneuvered, humiliated, the Roman army was forced to surrender and pass under the yoke, a symbolic arch made of enemy spears, a ritual so shameful that Roman writers struggle to describe it without wincing. It wasn't just defeat, it was disgrace. Rome could be defeated, but it could not be broken. After Caudine Forks, Rome didn't retreat. It restructured. Roads were extended to supply armies year-round. Colonies were planted to secure supply lines. Generals rotated more often, and the army adopted manipular tactics, more flexible formations that could move over rough terrain, unlike the rigid Greek phalanx. For 20 years, Rome clawed its way through the mountains, city by city, field by field. Villages were burned, forts built, allies bribed or crushed. At Bovianum in 305 BCE, Rome finally broke the Samnites' back. The war ended. But not the hatred. The Samnites would rise again. Because Rome hadn't just conquered territory, it had awakened resistance. By 290 BCE, Rome controlled most of central Italy, but it wasn't direct rule. Not yet. Rome created a network of alliances, treaties and dependencies that looked chaotic to outsiders, but functioned with ruthless efficiency. Some cities had full citizenship. Others had none, but owed military service. Some paid tribute. Others were allowed partial self-rule, as long as they didn't cross Rome. It was complex. It was uneven. But it worked. Rome's population grew. Her legions swelled. Her roads stretched across valleys and hills. Yet in the far south, across the shining sea from Greece, a wealthy city called Tarentum watched Rome's rise with cold disdain. They didn't fear Rome because they had a prince. And that prince had elephants. Tarentum, a wealthy Greek colony in southern Italy, saw itself as cultured, elite, and far above the rude Latin-speaking peasants of Rome. When a Roman fleet entered their harbour in 282 BCE, allegedly violating a centuries-old treaty, the Tarentines reacted with flair and fury. Their navy attacked, drowning Roman ships and mocking the survivors. Rome sent envoys. Tarentum sent insults, literally. One ambassador, a patrician, had his toga soiled with wine and laughter in the public square. Diplomacy had officially failed. Tarentum, realizing it had poked a lion in the eye, sent envoys of its own, not to Rome but across the Ionian Sea, to Epirus, to a man known for his brilliance, ambition, and ego, nearly as towering as his cheekbones, King Pyrrhus. He agreed to help. He saw not a war, but a stepping stone to empire. In 280 BCE, Pyrrhus landed in Italy with 25,000 men, 20 war elephants, and the aura of Alexander the Great's distant shadow. He styled himself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator of Greeks. Rome was unimpressed. Pyrrhus's first battle was at Heraclea. The Romans fought bravely, even managing to wound one of his elephants. But the beast panicked, trampling friend and foe alike. Still, Pyrrhus held the field. He sent a message to Rome. "Let's make peace." Rome replied, "Return to Epirus." Pyrrhus blinked. Most enemies begged after one defeat. Rome recruited. Then came the Battle of Esculapium. Pyrrhus won. Again. But as he surveyed the carnage, he murmured the words that would haunt his legacy. "One more such victory, and I am lost." Pyrrhus was learning what all of Rome's enemies eventually did. Winning a battle against Rome meant nothing if you couldn't break their will. Each victory drained his army. Each city he liberated expected gold, not taxes. Tarentum proved lazy. His Italian allies were half-hearted. And Rome just kept recruiting. In 275 BCE, Pyrrhus fought his final Italian battle at Beneventum. It was indecisive, chaotic, but the Romans held firm. Their consul, Curius Dentatus, refused to retreat. The elephants were spooked by fire. The tide turned. Pyrrhus, battered and disillusioned, withdrew. He muttered, "What a battlefield I leave to the Romans and Carthaginians." He wasn't wrong. Pyrrhus sailed home to Greece, to debts, and to disappointment. He had hoped to be a second Alexander. Instead, he was remembered as the man who gave his name to a specific kind of loss, Pyrrhic victory. Even in death, he didn't escape irony. While fighting in Argos, someone threw a tile from a rooftop. It struck him on the head. A soldier finished the job. Rome barely paused to record it. To them, Pyrrhus was a lesson, not a legend. Tarentum surrendered soon after. By 272 BCE, Rome controlled all of southern Italy, but across the sea, another power watched with growing unease. A city of trade and wealth, a city with fleets, coins, and colonies. A city named Carthage. For a brief moment, Rome and Carthage were allies. Both had feared Pyrrhus. Both had offered aid against him. Both now eyed the sea lanes of Sicily, not as equals, but as rivals. Carthage was old, Phoenician in origin, merchant by trade, and ruled by an elite who measured value in silver and sacrifice. Rome was young, aggressive, and awkwardly learning what it meant to command a growing empire. Between them sat Sicily, a rich, fractured island, divided between Greek cities and Carthaginian garrisons. And in 264 BCE, a minor conflict in the city of Messana spiraled into something far greater. Two rising powers, one strategic island, no room for sharing. The First Punic War was about to begin, and with it, Rome would learn to build ships, fight at sea, and make world war for the very first time. In 264 BCE, Rome crossed the Strait of Messina, not just a body of water, but a line in the sand. The city of Messana, held by mercenaries called the Mamertines, had asked both Carthage and Rome for help. Carthage arrived first, but then Rome showed up with legions and political will. Carthage refused to back down. Rome refused to go home. And just like that, the First Punic War began. Rome had never fought a major naval power. Its strength was in land battles, organized ranks, iron discipline, and roads that stretched like veins across Italy. Carthage was the queen of the Mediterranean, with warships, sailors, and centuries of maritime dominance. On paper, the war should have been over in a season, but Rome had no interest in paper. They were about to build something that would change the world. Rome needed a navy, fast. Legend says they captured a Carthaginian quinquereme, a massive 5-tiered warship, copied it plank for plank, and mass-produced it in a matter of months. But Rome wasn't interested in becoming better sailors. They wanted to bring the land battle onto the sea. Enter the corvus, a boarding bridge with a spike that could be dropped onto enemy ships, turning sea fights into hand-to-hand brawls, where Roman infantry could do what they did best, dominate. At Mylae in 2060 BCE, Roman consul Gaius Duilius used the corvus for the first time. Carthaginian captains laughed, until their decks were swarmed by Roman marines. Rome won its first major naval battle, and the sea no longer belonged to Carthage alone. The war ground on, slowly, brutally. Sicily became the arena. Cities changed hands, fields burned, mercenaries switched sides. Roman consuls came and went, each eager to carve their name into the island's soil. Carthage relied on wealth and skilled sailors. Rome relied on stubbornness, even when entire fleets were lost to storms twice. Rome rebuilt. In 256 BCE, Rome invaded Africa itself. The general Marcus Atilius Regulus landed near Carthage and won several battles. Carthage panicked. They hired a Spartan mercenary, Xanthippus, who brought order to their defense. He crushed the Roman army, captured Regulus, and drove Rome back across the sea. Regulus would become a martyr, allegedly tortured to death in Carthage, though accounts differ. But the war dragged on. Carthage, though battered, was resilient. They relied on experienced commanders, mobile cavalry, and strongholds like Lilybaeum and Drepana, where Roman sieges failed again and again. At Drepana in 249 BCE, Carthaginian Admiral Adherbal caught the Roman fleet by surprise, destroying over 90 ships. Morale plummeted, funds ran dry. One consul, Publius Claudius Pulcher, famously ignored a bad omen, sacred chickens refusing to eat, and lost the battle spectacularly. His response? If they won't eat, let them drink. He threw the birds into the sea. He was fined heavily by the Senate. But even as failures mounted, Rome refused to quit, and one final gamble would turn the tide. A privately funded fleet, paid for not by the Senate, but by wealthy Roman citizens. They built 200 ships, and Rome prepared for the final blow. In 2041 BCE, the Roman fleet under Gaius Lutatius Catulus engaged the Carthaginians near the Aegatis Islands. Carthage was transporting reinforcements and supplies, but their ships were heavier, slower, and undermanned. The Roman fleet struck hard and fast. It was a massive victory. Over 50 Carthaginian ships were sunk, 70 captured, and thousands taken prisoner. Carthage, exhausted and nearly bankrupt, sued for peace. Rome demanded full surrender in Sicily, a massive war indemnity, and control of strategic islands. The First Punic War, 23 years long, the longest conflict in Roman history to that point, was over. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province, and Carthage, humbled, resentful, licking its wounds, but far from dead, because in the hills of Iberia, a boy named Hannibal was watching, and he would never forget. In the bitter silence after the First Punic War, Carthage struggled. Its economy strained, its influence shrank. Its mercenaries, unpaid, revolted in what became known as the Truceless War. Rome, meanwhile, watched and waited, and opportunistically seized Sardinia and Corsica, while Carthage was too weak to stop them. It was a humiliation. One man understood the lesson deeply, Hamilcar Barca, Carthage's most brilliant general and most bitter. Denied reinforcements during the war, he'd returned a hero in spirit, but a ghost in politics. So he looked west, to Iberia, modern Spain, rich in silver, soldiers, and possibilities. He took his family, his loyal men, and his young son, Hannibal. And before they left, legend says Hamilcar made his son swear an oath upon the gods that he would never be a friend to Rome. Hannibal was 9, and he never broke that vow. In Iberia, Hamilcar Barca built an empire. He conquered local tribes, struck deals, mined silver, and created a base of power independent of Carthage's fragile government. He died in battle, but his legacy endured. His son-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, succeeded him and founded Carthago Nova, New Carthage, a gleaming city and military port. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 2021 BCE, the army turned, with no hesitation, to Hannibal. He was 26 years old. He immediately launched campaigns to secure all of southern Iberia. City after city fell. Troops followed him with fanatical loyalty. Even local tribes revered him for his fairness and fearlessness in equal measure. But Rome was watching. And when Hannibal laid siege to Saguntum, a city Rome claimed was under its protection, the Senate responded with fire. They sent envoys to Carthage. One Roman plunged his hand into his toga, then pulled it out empty. "In my hand, I carry peace or war. Choose." Carthage chose war, and Hannibal began preparing for something no one believed possible. In 218 BCE, Hannibal set out from Iberia with 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. His goal: strike Rome, not by sea, but by land, through Gaul, across the towering Alps, and into Italy itself. It was madness, but it worked. Through snow, rock slides, ambushes, and frostbite, Hannibal led his army over the Alps, a feat so legendary that even his enemies admired it. He lost thousands along the way. Many of the elephants died. But when he descended into northern Italy, the Romans weren't just surprised, they were terrified. This wasn't a defensive war. This was an invasion, and it was just beginning. Rome scrambled to respond. The consul Publius Cornelius Scipio rushed north and met Hannibal near the Ticinus River. There Hannibal's cavalry, led by his brother Mago and elite Numidian horsemen, overwhelmed the Roman forces. Scipio was wounded and nearly killed. He was rescued by his teenage son, also named Publius, a young man who would remember this war very well. You'll hear more about him later. The next Roman force set up at the Trebia River. They outnumbered Hannibal, but Hannibal chose the battlefield, frigid, marshy, and flanked by hidden units. When the Roman general Sempronius Longus took the bait and crossed the icy river, Hannibal's trap snapped shut. The Romans were routed, many froze or drowned. Hannibal had now defeated 2 Roman armies in 2 battles on Roman soil. Panic began to spread. In 2017 BCE, Rome tried again. The consul Gaius Flaminius, a political man more eager for glory than strategy, chased Hannibal through Etruria. Hannibal lured him toward Lake Trasimene, through narrow, foggy defiles. And there, he sprang his most perfect ambush. As the Roman army marched between hills and lake, Carthaginian troops burst from hiding from 3 sides. The Romans couldn't even form ranks. It was a massacre. Over 15,000 Roman soldiers died in a single morning. Flaminius was killed. Many drowned in the lake. Survivors were hunted like animals. Rome had just suffered one of the largest ambushes in military history. The city now braced for the unthinkable. The enemy was inside Italy, undefeated and approaching the capital. And still, Hannibal had not lost a single major engagement. But the worst and the most infamous was yet to come. After the disaster at Trasimene, Rome made a bold move. They suspended the Republic. In emergencies, Rome could appoint a dictator, not a tyrant, but a legal, time-limited office with supreme authority. Into this role stepped Quintus Fabius Maximus. He took one look at Hannibal's unbeaten army smiled grimly, and chose a strategy Rome had never respected. Don't fight. Fabius shadowed Hannibal without engaging him. He burned crops ahead of the Carthaginians, blocked mountain passes, and avoided open battle. Rome hated it. They called him cunctator, the delayer. Senators mocked him. The people groaned. But Hannibal, for the first time, was slowed. When Fabius's term ended, the Republic reverted to form. It wanted victory, glory, a decisive battle. So in 2016 BCE, they gathered their largest army yet, over 80,000 soldiers, and gave command to two men who wanted to crush Hannibal once and for all. Instead, they marched them to Cannae. Hannibal had studied Rome. He knew their strength, heavy infantry, stubborn courage, and their weakness, overconfidence. At Cannae, he arranged his army in a crescent, weakest troops in front, strongest on the flanks. The Roman double consul army advanced, pushing through the center, driving back Hannibal's front line. But it was a trap. As the Roman infantry pressed forward, Hannibal's flanks curved inward. The crescent became a circle. Then Carthaginian cavalry, having routed Rome's horsemen, swept behind the army and closed the trap. The Romans were now completely surrounded. There was no line, no rear, just chaos, and then butchery. What followed at Cannae was not a battle. It was annihilation. Romans were cut down by the thousands, crushed by their own panicked ranks, slaughtered in such numbers that the plain ran thick with blood and dust. Estimates vary, but as many as 50,000 Romans died in a single day. It was the worst defeat in Roman history. Entire consular armies gone, senators dead, officers slaughtered. The consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus was killed. His colleague escaped. Barely. News reached Rome. Women wailed in the streets. There were no messengers, only scattered survivors. The Senate met in silence. Some urged surrender, but the city did something extraordinary. It did not collapse. After Cannae, most expected Rome to beg for peace, but the Senate voted unanimously. No ransom for prisoners, no peace talks, no negotiations. Fabius returned to advise. Young men enlisted en masse. Even slaves were armed and promised freedom in exchange for loyalty. Rome began rebuilding, not with speeches, but with walls, conscription, and raw determination. Hannibal, for all his brilliance, made a crucial error. He did not march on the city itself. He lacked siege equipment. He hoped Rome's allies would defect. Some did. Capua, the second city of Italy, joined him, but many did not, because Rome, even shattered, still offered citizenship, stability, and law. Hannibal offered foreign command, and so Rome dug in and began waiting him out. Hannibal spent 15 years in Italy. He won battles, devastated countryside, captured cities, but never broke Rome. Rome adapted. Fabius's strategy became policy: harass, delay, isolate. The Senate empowered young generals, chief among them a brilliant commander rising through the ranks, Publius Cornelius Scipio, the boy who had saved his father after Ticinus, now grown into a strategist of daring and discipline. Scipio didn't want to fight Hannibal in Italy. He wanted to end the war by taking it to Carthage, and to do that, he'd need to cross the sea and confront Hannibal's own home, his own legacy, and his own army on African soil. While Hannibal ravaged Italy, Rome turned its eyes westward to Iberia, the base of Carthage's wealth and manpower. In 2110 BCE, a young and relatively untested general took command of Roman forces there, Publius Cornelius Scipio. He was just 25, but within a year he pulled off a masterstroke, the capture of New Carthage, the heavily fortified capital of Carthaginian Spain. He struck when the enemy least expected it, storming the city while its main armies were away. He freed hostages, paid his troops, and treated locals with unusual fairness. The tribes began to shift their loyalty, not out of fear, but respect. Scipio wasn't just fighting a war. He was building an image of a new kind of Roman general, one who could win not only battles, but hearts. After New Carthage, Scipio faced the Carthaginian generals Hasdrubal, Mago, and Hasdrubal Gisco, not just commanders but brothers of Hannibal. In a series of battles from 28 to 26 BCE, Scipio dismantled their armies one by one. At Bacula, he outmaneuvered Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother, who fled to join Hannibal in Italy, only to be intercepted and killed in Gaul. His severed head was later thrown into Hannibal's camp. The message was clear. Rome was closing in. By 26 BCE, Scipio had conquered all of Carthaginian Spain. He returned to Rome, not just victorious, but beloved, hailed as Scipio Africanus, the man destined to finish the war. He had one goal left, not Italy, not Spain, Carthage itself. In 24 BCE, Scipio landed in North Africa with a lean, deadly army and a clear plan: force Carthage to recall Hannibal. He formed alliances with local Numidian princes, especially the young and charismatic Massinissa, who hated Carthage's betrayal and wanted his kingdom back. Carthage, in panic, called on its aging lion Hannibal to return from Italy. He had spent 15 years on the peninsula. He had never lost a pitched battle, but he had failed to win the war. And now, at long last, he would go home, back to defend the city that had once sent him out and now needed saving. Hannibal landed in Africa in 23 BCE. Scipio, now an experienced commander, offered him terms: peace in exchange for Carthage giving up its fleet and foreign holdings. Carthage considered it, then rejected. The stage was set. Two of history's greatest generals, both undefeated in open battle, would meet near the small town of Zama in 2020 BCE. Hannibal brought veterans, elephants, and what remained of his genius. Scipio brought Numidian cavalry, fresh discipline, and an army forged in Iberian fire. Before the battle, the two men met in person. They spoke privately about terms, about empires, about destiny. But no agreement came. As Hannibal walked away, he was heard to mutter, "The gods give victory to the one who deserves it." The Battle of Zama began with elephants. Hannibal's front line, massive beasts, trumpeting and armored, charged toward the Roman ranks. Scipio had prepared. His men opened lanes, allowing the elephants to pass harmlessly through, spooked by noise, redirected by javelins, or driven into panic. The Roman cavalry, led by Massinissa, clashed with Carthage's horsemen and drove them off. The infantry lines collided. Hard. It was brutal, grinding combat. But then the Roman cavalry returned, striking Carthage's rear. The trap was complete. For the first time, Hannibal was outmaneuvered, outflanked, and outmatched. He ordered a retreat. Zama was a decisive Roman victory, and with it, the Second Punic War ended. Carthage surrendered. Its fleet was burned, its empire dissolved. And Hannibal, he lived but fled, forever a general without a war. With the defeat at Zama, Carthage surrendered on Roman terms. All war elephants surrendered, all but 10 warships destroyed. A massive indemnity paid over 50 years. Carthage could no longer wage war without Rome's permissions. Carthage was left alive, barely a shell of its former power. Rome, meanwhile, emerged as the dominant force in the Western Mediterranean. It now controlled Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, Spain, and dozens of alliances held together by treaties, threats, and tribute. But power brings paranoia, and Rome had a long memory. Hannibal, now in exile, still lived. After Zama, Hannibal Barca returned to Carthage, not as a general, but as a reformer. He overhauled the corrupt Senate, stabilized the economy, accelerated payments to Rome. He was trying to save Carthage. Rome noticed. In 1905 BCE, fearing even peaceful power, Rome sent envoys demanding Hannibal be handed over. He fled, first to Tyre, then to Antiochus III, the king of the Seleucid Empire in the east. There, Hannibal became a wandering advisor, a relic, a name that still haunted Roman dreams. Eventually, he was cornered. At Bithynia, when Roman agents closed in, Hannibal took poison, reportedly with the words, "Let us free Rome from her fear of an old man." Hannibal died, but his memory didn't, because Rome had learned something from him. Total war, ruthless dominance, fear as a weapon, and soon they would use it. With Carthage subdued, Rome turned its gaze east to the wealthy, fractious kingdoms of the Hellenistic world. Greece had long been in decline, divided between city-states and larger monarchies carved from Alexander's fallen empire. Rome began by protecting Greek cities from Macedonian rule. Then, in 197 BCE, at the Battle of Cynocephalae, Roman legions crushed the Macedonian phalanx, proving flexibility beat formation. Rome now controlled Macedonia, but they didn't stop. In 19d BCE, they defeated Antiochus III, Hannibal's last host, at the Battle of Magnesia in Asia Minor. By 1680 BCE, they had conquered all of Greece, and in 1406 BCE, a fateful year, 2 ancient cities would fall in a single, brutal stroke. Carthage had kept its peace, paid its debts, played by Rome's rules, but prosperity returned. Trade blossomed. The city began to shine again, and Rome, as always, saw threat in success. Enter Cato the Elder, a stern Roman senator who ended every speech, regardless of topic, with the same words, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. In 1409 BCE, Rome found its excuse, a border conflict between Carthage and its neighbor Numidia. When Carthage fought back without Roman permission, Rome declared war. The Third Punic War was swift and merciless. The Roman army landed outside Carthage in 1409 BCE. The Carthaginians pleaded. They offered hostages, weapons, concessions. Rome demanded the impossible. The city must be abandoned and relocated inland, away from the sea. Carthage refused. So the siege began. It lasted 3 years. Starvation, fire, and slaughter followed. In 1406 BCE, Roman troops breached the walls. House-to-house combat raged, fires spread. Screams echoed through streets once filled with scholars and merchants. Over 150,000 people were killed or enslaved. And then, just to ensure history remembered, Rome razed Carthage to the ground. Salt in the soil is a myth, but intent to erase, that was real. Carthage was no longer a city. It was a warning. By 1406 BCE, Rome ruled all of Italy, the entire western Mediterranean, the wealthy cities of Greece, and the ruins of Carthage. They called it Mare Nostrum, RC. Roman governors oversaw provinces like Hispania, Asia, Macedonia, and Africa. Taxes flowed in, grain fed the cities, gold filled the coffers. But with conquest came contradiction. The Republic, founded on civic virtue, shared power, and fear of tyranny, was now an empire in everything but name, and the Senate, once the noble brain of the state, became a battleground for wealthy elites fighting over spoils. Back in Rome, farms were failing, slaves were replacing citizens, and veterans returned from war to find their homes gone. The outer world feared Rome, but inside its walls, the Republic was cracking. Into this growing inequality stepped 2 brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Members of a respected noble family, both were tribunes of the people, a position created to protect plebeian rights. Tiberius, in 1303 BCE, proposed land reforms, break up massive estates, give land to the poor, and restore the shrinking pool of eligible Roman soldiers. The Senate was outraged. Tiberius went directly to the people. He passed the law. He bypassed tradition. And for that, he paid with his life. He was clubbed to death on the steps of the Temple of Jupiter by senators wielding wooden benches. Years later, Gaius Gracchus tried again. Land reforms, grain subsidies, judicial changes, more radical, more determined. He too was hunted, fled, and died by suicide as Roman soldiers closed in. The Republic had sent its message. Reform will be punished. But the system kept breaking. Rome's armies, once drawn from land-owning citizens, could no longer fill their ranks. Too few eligible men, too many wars. Enter Gaius Marius, a military genius and political outsider, a novus homo, a new man without patrician ancestry. In 1007 BCE, he proposed a radical idea: recruit the landless poor and reward them with land after service. The Senate resisted. Marius did it anyway. The result? A new type of army, one that owed loyalty not to the Republic, but to its general. He defeated Germanic invaders at Arque Sexti and Vercelli, saving Rome from barbarian destruction. He was hailed as the third founder of Rome, but in doing so, he opened a door that could never be closed. Now, ambitious men could raise private armies, and one of them, Marius's former subordinate, was waiting in the wings. His name was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a patrician, clever, ruthless, and humiliated by Marius's rise. In 88 BCE, Sulla was granted command of a campaign against Mithridates VI of Pontus, a deadly Eastern king. But the Senate, influenced by Marius, revoked the command. Sulla responded the Roman way. He marched his army into Rome. It had never been done. Legions, raised to fight foreign enemies, now trampled through the streets of the city that birthed them. Sulla declared Marius a public enemy. Marius fled. Sulla left to wage his Eastern war. But Marius returned, took Rome by force, and died soon after, victorious but sick and exhausted. When Sulla came back, he did it again. Sulla returned in 82 BCE, crushed the Marian faction, and seized Rome in blood. He became dictator for an indefinite term, reviving an office that hadn't existed for a century. Then came the proscriptions. He posted lists of enemies in the forum. Names marked for death, killers were rewarded, property was seized. Hundreds of senators died. Thousands more fled. He rewrote the constitution, reduced the power of the tribunes, reasserted the Senate's dominance. Then, bizarrely, he resigned. Sulla retired to the countryside, drinking himself into oblivion, and died peacefully in 78 BCE. But the lesson he left behind? The Republic's rules could be bent, broken, and reassembled by anyone with enough legions. And rising through those very legions were three names that would change the world: Crassus, Pompey, Caesar. After Sulla's death, the Republic limped on. Its institutions weakened, its elections corrupted, its provinces bled for Rome, while Rome bled from within. Then came three men, each powerful alone, unstoppable together. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who had made a fortune off fire and fear. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, a brilliant general who crushed pirates and conquered the East. Gaius Julius Caesar, young, charming, deeply in debt, and dangerously ambitious. In 60 BCE, they formed an unofficial alliance, the first triumvirate, to dominate Roman politics. Each wanted something. Crassus, business favors. Pompey, land for his veterans. Caesar, a consulship and command of an army. Together, they got everything. But power shared never stays shared. In 59 BCE, Caesar became consul and immediately bulldozed opposition. Then he left Rome and took command of Gaul, modern-day France. For nearly a decade, Caesar campaigned across Europe, defeating Celtic tribes, crossing into Britain, and writing dispatches home that doubled as brilliant propaganda. Veni vidi vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. He didn't just fight. He built loyalty. His legions were devoted to him, not the Senate. Meanwhile, Crassus died in 53 BCE in Parthia, his army annihilated, his head sent east as a trophy. Pompey, now sole power in Rome, drifted away from Caesar. The alliance fractured. The Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome alone. He refused. Instead, he crossed a river. In 49 BCE, Caesar led his army across the Rubicon River, the legal boundary of his province. It was an act of treason, and of destiny. As he crossed, he allegedly said, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. Rome panicked. Pompey and the Senate fled the city. Caesar entered unopposed. What followed was a brutal civil war. Caesar versus Pompey. They clashed across Italy, Spain, Greece, and North Africa. At Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar's smaller army crushed Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt and was murdered upon arrival by a local ruler trying to win Caesar's favor. When Caesar saw Pompey's severed head, he wept. They had been allies, friends, rivals. Now only Caesar remained. Caesar returned to Rome in triumph. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, still used in modified form today. He granted citizenship, forgave debts, settled veterans, rebuilt temples. He wore purple, sat in a golden chair. Coins bore his face. In 44 BCE, he was named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. To many, he was a savior. To others, a king in everything but name. And Rome, even now, could not forget its hatred of kings. A group of senators conspired. Among them was Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar trusted, perhaps even loved. The stage was set for betrayal. On March 15, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, Caesar entered the theatre of Pompeii, unarmed, unguarded. He was surrounded by senators. At first, he laughed off their gestures. Then the blades appeared. He was stabbed 23 times. "Et tu, Brute?" he allegedly gasped. "You too, Brutus?" He fell at the base of Pompey's statue, the man he had defeated. The Republic had struck back, but it was too late. The crowd rioted. Caesar's funeral turned into a riotous funeral pyre revolution. His killers fled, and power did not return to the Senate. It passed instead to his heir, a young man no one took seriously. Yet, after Caesar's assassination, few looked to his adopted heir for leadership. Gaius Octavius, just 18 years old, was sickly, bookish, and unproven. He was Caesar's great-nephew, and posthumously adopted in the dictator's will. He took a new name, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, Octavian. But he didn't act like a scared boy. He gathered support, claimed his inheritance, and raised a private army using Caesar's veterans, loyal to his name. Meanwhile, Rome descended into chaos. The Senate, led by Cicero, tried to use Octavian as a blunt weapon against Caesar's old ally, Mark Antony. Octavian played along, until it suited him to turn on them. Soon, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, another of Caesar's generals, formed a brutal political alliance, the Second Triumvirate. But it wasn't like the first. This one came with legal powers and open bloodshed. The Triumvirate declared proscriptions, hit lists of enemies, just like Sulla had done. Senators, rivals, and political threats were murdered. Cicero, once the voice of the Republic, was caught fleeing and executed. His severed hands were nailed to the rostra, the speaking platform in the forum, a final gruesome message from the new regime. The triumvirs then turned to vengeance for Caesar. The assassins, Brutus and Cassius, had fled east, raising armies in Greece. In 42 BCE, Octavian and Antony faced them at Philippi. Brutus fell on his sword. Cassius committed suicide. Caesar's death had been avenged, but the alliance that had achieved it would not last. After Philippi, the Second Triumvirate divided the Roman world. Octavian took the west. Antony took the east. Lepidus got North Africa briefly, until he was sidelined and forgotten. Antony went to Egypt and into the arms of Cleopatra VII. She was brilliant, politically shrewd, and already a mother to Caesar's son, Caesarion. Antony and Cleopatra became lovers, partners, parents. He gave her Roman land. She gave him ships and silver. Back in Rome, Octavian crafted a masterful propaganda campaign. Antony had become Egyptian, soft, and enslaved to a foreign queen. The Senate grew nervous. The people grew restless. War was coming, not against a foreign kingdom, but against another Roman. In 31 BCE, Octavian and Antony's forces met at Actium, off the western coast of Greece. It was more than a battle. It was a referendum on who would rule the Roman world. Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, trapped Antony's ships in the bay. Disease ravaged the Egyptian forces. Cleopatra fled the battle. Antony followed. Their navy collapsed. Their army deserted. Octavian was victorious. The final act came a year later. Octavian invaded Egypt. Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra tried to negotiate, then chose death, allegedly by ass bite, though the truth remains elusive. Octavian captured Caesarion, Caesar's son by Cleopatra, and executed him. No room for two Caesars, he said. Rome now belonged to one man. Octavian returned not as a conqueror, but as a restorer. He refused kingship, refused dictatorship. In 27 BCE, he offered to resign all powers. The Senate, dazzled and intimidated, instead gave him a new title. Augustus, the revered one. He became princeps, first among equals, with subtle but absolute control. He commanded the armies, held lifelong tribunician power, controlled the treasury, religion, foreign affairs. The Republic still existed, but only in name. Augustus ruled for 40 years. He brought peace, built roads, temples, a bureaucracy. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, had begun, and the Roman Republic was officially dead. In its place stood an empire, cloaked in tradition, ruled by a man who never wore a crown and never needed to. When Augustus died in 14 CE, the question loomed, who would follow? He had no son, but he had carefully shaped a successor, his stepson, Tiberius. Capable, yes. Charismatic, not even close. The Senate approved. Rome accepted, but Tiberius didn't want power, not in the public eye. He ruled from a distance, gradually retreating from the capital until he relocated entirely to the island of Capri. There, surrounded by astrologers and sycophants, he let others rule in his name, most notably the terrifying Sejanus, commander of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus purged rivals, executed senators, built a private empire under the emperor's nose, until Tiberius turned on him too. Sejanus was arrested, strangled, and his body thrown down the Gemonian stairs. By the time Tiberius died in 37 CE, Rome was desperate for someone, anyone, to lead them with clarity. Instead, they got Caligula, Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, better known by his childhood nickname Caligula, Little Boots. Began with promise. He was the son of a beloved general, the darling of the legions, young and charismatic. For a few months, Rome rejoiced. Then he got sick, possibly encephalitis or a psychological break. And when he recovered, something had changed. He began demanding worship as a living god. He mocked senators in public, held gladiator matches for amusement, declared war on Poseidon, ordering his soldiers to stab the sea and collect seashells as trophies. He may have named his horse a consul, or maybe just said he would. The line between rumor and fact began to dissolve. He drained the treasury, slept with his sisters, paraded about in gold. In 41 CE, his own bodyguards had enough. They cornered him in a corridor and stabbed him to death. The Senate hoped to restore the Republic, but the Praetorian Guard had other plans. After Caligula's murder, the Senate tried to debate Rome's future, but in the palace, hiding behind a curtain, the soldiers found Claudius, Caligula's uncle. He stammered, limped, had spent his life mocked as a fool. They dragged him out and declared him emperor, and to everyone's surprise, he ruled well. Claudius expanded the empire into Britain, reformed the legal system, and improved the city's infrastructure, but he was easily manipulated, especially by his wives. His third wife, Messalina, was executed for plotting against him. His fourth, Agrippina the Younger, convinced him to adopt her son, Nero. Then she likely poisoned Claudius with mushrooms. The empire now passed to a teenage boy who played the lyre, loved poetry, and would one day burn Rome. Nero began his reign with promise. Guided by the philosopher Seneca and the general Burrus, he ruled justly. But then came ambition. He murdered his stepbrother, drove his mother Agrippina to exile, then death, reportedly after several failed attempts, including a collapsing boat. He sang in public, acted in plays. Roman elites cringed as their emperor danced on stage while legions bled abroad. Then came the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. Nero was rumored to have played music while the city burned, though that's likely propaganda. What is true, he blamed the Christians, a small secretive sect, and unleashed horrific persecutions. He built a massive palace over the ruins, declared himself divine, and slowly Rome turned on him. Revolts erupted. Governors in Gaul and Spain declared open rebellion. The Senate branded Nero a public enemy. He fled the city, barefoot, disguised, panicked, and hid in a villa outside Rome. There, hearing that execution was imminent, Nero begged a servant to help him die. His final words, "What an artist dies in me." He was 30 years old. With his death, the Julio-Claudian line ended, and Rome, for the first time in over a century, had no emperor. What followed would be one of the most chaotic years in Roman history, a year of emperors, assassinations, and civil war. With Nero's suicide in 68 CE, Rome was rudderless. The Senate declared an old, steady senator named Galba as emperor, but Galba lacked troops, tact, and time. He refused to pay the Praetorian Guard the bribe they expected. Worse, he insulted a powerful general, Marcus Salvius Otho. Otho struck fast. He bribed the guard. Galba was beheaded in the Forum. His head was displayed on a spear. Otho became emperor. But out in the provinces, another general, Vitellius, commander of the legions in Germania, had already declared himself emperor. The armies clashed. Otho was defeated at the Battle of Bedriacum and took his own life, writing that he preferred one noble death over civil war. Vitellius entered Rome. He would last 8 months. As Vitellius indulged in banquets and executions, word came from the east. Titus Flavius Vespasianus, Vespasian general of Judea, had been proclaimed emperor by his legions. He marched west. His supporters declared for him across the empire. Vitellius tried to hold Rome, but in December 69 CE, Vespasian's troops stormed the city. Vitellius was captured, dragged through the streets, and beaten to death on the Gemonian stairs. Rome had burned, bled, turned on itself. But now, it had an emperor from outside the old aristocracy. Vespasian, the builder, the stabilizer, the founder of a new dynasty. He brought order where ambition had brought ruin. While Rome fought itself, Judea rebelled. The Great Jewish Revolt had begun in 66 CE, fueled by taxation, oppression, and religious tension. When Vespasian was recalled to claim the throne, he left the final blow to his son, Titus. In 70 CE, Titus besieged Jerusalem. The city resisted fiercely. Starvation followed. Internal factionalism tore the defenders apart. Eventually, Roman forces breached the walls. The Second Temple, centerpiece of Jewish faith, was burned and destroyed. Thousands were killed or enslaved. The treasures of the temple were hauled back to Rome and used to fund Vespasian's greatest construction project, the Flavian Amphitheatre, better known today as the Colosseum, a symbol of victory and a grave of resistance. Vespasian ruled with discipline. He balanced the books, restored confidence, and mocked himself frequently, once joking as he died, "Alas, I think I'm becoming a god." His son Titus succeeded him in 79 CE, kind, charming, and popular. But his reign was plagued by disaster. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum in fire and ash, a devastating fire in Rome, and a plague that killed thousands. Yet the people loved him. When he died after just 2 years, many wept. His brother, however, did not. Domitian, younger son of Vespasian, seized power quickly and ruled for 15 years. He was efficient, intelligent, and increasingly paranoid. He demanded to be called Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. He micromanaged the economy, imposed strict morality laws, and launched building projects. He also exiled or executed many senators, including former allies. His rule was dark but stable. In 96 CE, palace officials conspired. Domitian was stabbed in his own chambers by a freedman named Stephanus. Possibly with the empress's knowledge, he died childless. And with him, the Flavian dynasty ended. The Senate rejoiced. Monuments were torn down, his name erased from inscriptions. But out of this storm came a new emperor, chosen not by family, but by reputation. An old general, wise, calm, honest. Nerva. And for the first time in Roman history, a dynasty would be built not on blood, but on merit. After Domitian's death, the Senate chose Nerva, an elder statesman with no children, no army, and no time to waste. He did one thing that changed everything. He adopted a successor, not by blood, but by merit. That successor was Trajan, a Spanish-born general, adored by the legions, and destined to become one of Rome's greatest rulers. Thus began the era of the 5 good emperors, a line of men chosen for skill, not family. Nerva, 96-98 CE, balanced. Trajan, 98 to 117, bold. Hadrian, 117-38, thoughtful. Antoninus Pius, 13-8 to 161. Marcus Aurelius, 16-1 to 18, philosophical. Each ruled well. Each left Rome stronger. This was the height of the empire. Its borders stretched from Britain to Babylon, from the Rhine to the Sahara, but no golden age lasts forever. Trajan expanded Rome to its greatest size. He conquered Dacia, modern Romania, bringing back so much gold that public taxes were reduced. He also led campaigns deep into Mesopotamia, a risky stretch of Rome's strength. But Trajan understood the value of legacy. He built Trajan's Market, Trajan's Column, and a new Forum, physical symbols of Rome's imperial glory. His successor, Hadrian, reversed course. He withdrew from Mesopotamia, recognizing that overreach invites collapse. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, not to expand, but to hold. He loved Greek culture, traveled constantly, and ruled more like a guardian than a conqueror. But he left one difficult question. What do you do with an empire that has no more room to grow? Antoninus Pius ruled peacefully for 23 years, a time so quiet, Roman historians could barely fill their scrolls. Then came Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, author of Meditations, and model of Stoic virtue, but the world would not give him peace. He spent most of his reign fighting on the northern frontier, against Germanic tribes like the Marcomanni and Quadi. Plague struck, troops thinned, the Danube boiled with violence. Through it all, Marcus wrote of duty, virtue, and suffering. But his greatest failure came in a decision of blood over merit. He named his biological son as heir. His name? Commodus. Commodus, 1892 CE, saw himself not as a ruler, but a god. He dressed as Hercules, fought in the arena, renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana, and ruled with paranoia and cruelty. Where Marcus Aurelius had governed with philosophy, Commodus governed with narcissism. He was eventually strangled in his bath by a wrestler, part of yet another palace conspiracy. What followed was chaos, civil war, assassinations, emperors rising and falling like dice in a cup. Rome would survive for centuries more, splitting into east and west, enduring invasions, plagues, religious revolutions, and final collapse. But after the 5 good emperors, the soul of the republic turned empire. That delicate balance of duty and power had been lost. It had been replaced by emperors who demanded worship, and an empire that could no longer remember why it was built in the first place. And that, night owls, is the Roman tale. From wolf-nursed twins to Caesars in golden laurel, from senatorial speeches to smoking temples, 1,000 years of ambition, glory, betrayal, and rubble. We've journeyed from Romulus to Commodus, through republic and empire, and all the beautiful, terrible moments in between. Thank you for staying awake with me. Let me know in the comments which emperor fascinates you the most, which moment felt most human or most horrifying, and if you want another deep dive, Byzantium maybe, or the fall of the Western Empire, let me know. Until next time, keep your lamps low, your minds curious, and remember, all roads may lead to Rome, but not all roads return.